people aren't inherently just a negative or a positive. I think the reality is humanity as a whole is this sort of ambiguous meta circle. And meta is very arbitrary. That could mean whatever you want for yourself. But humanity exists in a physical sense. And because we are physical, those electrons and neurons that fire to create the meta actually exist. And what I mean by that is love is real, fear is real, your anger is real, your resentment is real, but even your peace is real. And so there is a universe where on some scale we balance that reality, because humans are physically highly destructive, but metaphysically we're actually very emotional, easily hurt, very damageable beings. Sociopathy only results from a damaged person in a lot of cases. That insanity, that terrible person, that's from the results of all of the physical parts of humanity. But the meta is what informs the physical, and those things are much more fragile and peaceful in the way they manifest. The one thing I want to say before I hand it over to Ramon is that means at some point we need to leave from what I would call is my own calling, which is not necessarily leave, by the way, but we need to find a way to find a middle ground between my calling, which is quite often to always be prepared, to be the monster, to be the predator and be ready to do it, but also maybe even maintaining it to some extent through some sort of maybe immoral act in a way, whether that be war, whatever you want to say, right? Violence begets violence, though, and so we need a middle ground where we can go from that and take the meta and make the meta more physical by actively only doing it when we need to do it. I'm going to hand it to Ramon.
Hearing you say that, I want to say two things. When he says being a predator and to talk about war and violence and being immoral, I know for a fact, and him saying it at the end, there's always this middle ground that needs to be found, because right now it's occurring. War has always been abuse, and we know the kind of abuse that they do to whatever gender. We know the kind of violence, we know kind of trauma it inflicts on the victims and even the people doing it, because these sociopaths have to rationalize it themselves. And that shit right there creates people who are so messed up, and whether they come back in society, I'm not trying to say all vets, but if you look at what's happening and where they come from, Fort Braggs, there's a lot of stuff happening. Now, I personally think the biggest thing and my purpose and goal is that humans forget about the humans and humanity. And like, there's this weird line in which people forget that they themselves have an influence, that they're a tree in the forest. And I say that because, as you say, I try to focus on empowerment. I see people, and if you can improve your community in a way that doesn't harm people, then you're doing the right thing. And if you can teach the next person and teach the next person, it's a short work before we reach everyone. And at the end of the day, you also reach out